Hop. Et c'est parti, à toi Cécile.
Bonjour à tous, merci de me donner la parole au nom du groupe MIVEGEC 1.5. Donc, avec la rentrée, on reprend les bonnes résolutions. Et aujourd'hui, le thème proposé par MIVEGEC 1.5, c'est celui du suivi des fournisseurs. En effet, à MIVEGEC, il existe plusieurs outils pour suivre les fournisseurs. Et ça nous paraissait important de les expliciter, les présenter aujourd'hui, les expliciter et comprendre le rôle un peu de chacun. Donc, tout d'abord, il existe un premier outil dans le cadre de la démarche qualité avec Marie Rossignol. Donc là, tout le monde n'est pas concerné puisque ce suivi-là concerne uniquement la partie, le périmètre certifié du laboratoire. Donc, les personnes concernées sont sollicitées une fois par an par Marie. Et depuis l'année dernière, à cette évaluation des fournisseurs, on a ajouté une note dite environnementale. Par ailleurs, il existe un deuxième outil qui se trouve dans le portail des ressources MIVEGEC et qui permet de déclarer une non-conformité liée au fournisseur. Ça peut être une non-conformité quelle qu'elle soit, liée à l'environnement ou pas du tout, tout dysfonctionnement lié au fournisseur. Et lorsque ça arrive, tout un chacun peut créer une fiche d'amélioration. Et enfin, le troisième outil qui a été créé plus récemment par le groupe MIVEGEC 1.5, c'est un outil qui permet de suivre l'impact environnemental lié aux colis et aux livraisons. Donc, n'importe quelle personne peut participer à ce suivi à travers le lien que vous voyez ici, que je vais mettre tout à l'heure dans la discussion. Donc, l'objet, c'est chaque fois qu'on reçoit un colis qui nous paraît inapproprié, de le signaler. Par exemple, lorsque vous recevez un colis énorme par rapport aux produits qui se trouvent à l'intérieur, l'impact environnemental n'est pas du tout approprié à ce que vous avez commandé. Ou alors, vous avez commandé, vous faites une commande chez un fournisseur et le fournisseur multiplie le nombre de livraisons au lieu de livrer tout en une seule fois, en un seul paquet. Ou encore, on peut noter des choses sur la nature du colis qui est livré. Il y a des fournisseurs qui font l'effort de livrer dans des colis en matériaux recyclables, que ce soit l'emballage ou que ce soit le contenu à l'intérieur qui permet de caler votre produit. Et alors que d'autres fournisseurs mettent des matériaux qui ne sont pas du tout ni recyclés ni recyclables et qui ont un gros impact sur l'environnement. Donc, le fait de lister tout ça, ça nous permet, à l'issue de, par exemple, une année de suivi, de recontacter les fournisseurs pour leur dire on aimerait une amélioration de votre part sur tel et tel point. À l'inverse, donc n'importe qui peut participer à ce suivi. Et à l'inverse, si vous êtes particulièrement satisfait des livraisons d'un fournisseur qui va systématiquement utiliser des colis recyclés ou recyclables, vous pouvez le noter aussi. Ça permettra de partager avec les collègues et de dire on est très content avec tel fournisseur. Voilà. Donc, je vous remercie pour votre attention. Je vais vous remettre le lien pour le suivi de l'impact environnemental dans la discussion et je vous souhaite un bon séminaire. Hop.
Merci beaucoup pour cette minute verte. Donc, le séminaire d'aujourd'hui va être présenté par Antoine, qui a une formation de biochimiste et qui devient un expert sur la malaria puisqu'il a commencé à travailler dessus dès son doctorat. Et qui, après avoir obtenu une ATIP à venir pour diriger les types d'attaque malaria au LPIHI, continue à travailler actuellement sur la malaria. Et il est également rattaché au MIVEGEC. Antoine, je te laisse la parole pour ce séminaire. Alors, Antoine, ton micro est éteint.
Voilà, sorry about that. Good morning again to everyone. Merci Florence for hosting me today. So yes, indeed, I'm officially part of ELFI as a chargé de recherche. but I've been kindly invited by a triad team to join the meetings as well. So that's why you might have seen my face around MIVEGEC. And I keep on, I plan on keep on collaborating a lot with MIVEGEC, of course, with many of you. So today I would like to introduce you to asymptomatic malaria by showing you data from a cohort that we recruited in the Gambia, and that will naturally lead us to talk about antigenic variation. The two ways currently that we study antigenic variation from CHMI, Controlled Human Malaria Infection, and from these cohorts. But first, in case you have never heard about malaria before, this one slide is for you. Just briefly, it's of course caused by Plasmodium parasites, unicellular eukaryotes transmitted by Anopheles mosquito. Parasite first goes into the liver, and after a few days, parasites will start invading red blood cells. That's when symptoms start to occur. And the life cycle within red blood cells lasts about 48 hours. And then parasites will be transmitted by mosquitoes, and that's where sexual recombination can occur. So if you have attended a talk about malaria epidemiology/immunology before, you might have seen this graph, which simplifies severe, mild, or asymptomatic infection. So severe infections are cerebral or severe anemia. By asymptomatic infection, we mean an individual who is infected with Plasmodium falciparum, but shows no obvious symptoms. And mild or uncomplicated malaria is anything in between, which obviously is quite a large range of symptoms. Now, keeping this in mind, last April, I was lucky, despite COVID restriction, to be able to travel to Cameroon. And we went to this school. We recruited 60 children. We took a finger prick from all of them. Can you guess what was the prevalence in that school? And for that, we're going to try out an interactive seminar. Florence, tu peux lancer la question. So the question here that I would like you to answer, I would like to know your opinion about what do you think is the prevalence by microscopy for Plasmodium falciparum in 60 children at school. So because they're at school, they're presumably healthy. And yes, the parasite was detected by microscopy, which is obviously not the most sensitive method. It's nowhere near as sensitive as qPCR, for example. So those of you who follow my Twitter accounts might know the answer already. The answers are completely anonymous, so feel free to click on the wrong one. I believe you can stop here, Florence. Actually, I can do it myself. Oh.
We are missing a few answers. I don't know if you want to wait.
Right. Can you see the results now?
Yeah, 14 people answered over the 21.
So the actual answer is 85%. So 85% of children were infected asymptomatically by Plasmodium falciparum in that school. So you understand why they don't care too much about COVID over there, because obviously falciparum is much more of an issue than COVID. Thanks. Now I'm struggling to transition. So how do you reconcile that? How would you reconcile this graph with what I saw in Cameroon? Well, you have to keep in mind that this graph was built by a clinician. If you wait in your clinic, indeed, all the severe malaria cases you will see in Africa will be young children. In Asia, it will be a different story. I'm only talking about Africa here. However, from the parasite perspective, at the end of the day, severe malaria cases are only the exception, not the rule. When you wait in your clinic, you don't see all these children who are still at school and are all infected. Well, most of them are infected asymptomatically by Plasmodium falciparum. So, okay, so it's clear that asymptomatic chronic infections are common, but how long do they last? You can bring up the question. Do you think it's going to last about a day, a week, a month, a year, or more? So the answer is coming up. Yes. Ok. Florence, tu peux montrer les résultats? I don't see. Je ne vois pas les résultats sur l'écran. Je ne sais pas si toi tu les vois.
Yeah, normally I'm showing.
Okay, well, everyone. So basically, the votes is between 1 month and a year. And here I'm showing the answer from a very recent study from Uganda, where they followed the duration of infection in young, older children or adults. And on average, it was around a year. But interestingly, the infection lasted twice as long in men than in women. So it's quite long. But that's, of course, in Africa and people who've been infected many times before. So if you can put up the last question, after that I leave you alone. What would happen in a naive host? And the data here, that's the only data we've got about this, as far as I'm aware, is from malaria therapy. So back in the 1940s and 50s, some, especially American, but also Europeans, were deliberately infected with Plasmodium falciparum. And it's still a great data set because these people were not treated unless they developed severe malaria. Otherwise, they were not treated. So we know from a naive host how long an infection can last. And actually, I think you can stop the poll, Florence. Actually, the answer, even in naive hosts, on average, the duration of an infection was 7 months, which is, I think, much longer than most malariologists would have expected. So clearly, we need to understand how the parasite is able to survive in the same host for so long. And to do that, we recruited a cohort in the Gambia. So we recruited 42 individuals, all ages, children and adults, who were positive for falciparum at the end of the wet season / beginning of the dry season. And we follow them. Each month, we took a blood sample from these 42 people. At first, just to determine whether they were still positive for falciparum or whether they naturally cleared their own infection. And here are the results. Well, first I should mention that just 3 people developed clinical symptoms, and so they were obviously treated right away and were taken out of the cohort. And the results are actually quite dichotomic because for 17 people, so almost half of them, they lost the falciparum parasite within a month or 2. However, for 22 people, the infection lasted for the entire duration of the dry season. So either the infection is very short, and we call these fast clearers, or the infection is long, and we call them slow clearers. And this is, of course, very important from an epidemiological perspective, because these slow clearers are presumably the reservoir for Plasmodium falciparum during the dry season when there is no transmission. So the next malaria epidemics, the following wet season, will likely start from these slow clearers. So how come some infections last for such a long time? And can we identify host or parasite factors associated with longer infections? Well, first of all, there is no association with age of participants. Of course, it's a very small study, which we always keep that in mind. But we found no association with age of participant, no association with hemoglobin concentration. So basically, most people in the Gambia are slightly anemic, whether or not they're infected. No association with the hemoglobin genotype. And what about the immune response? Well, that's obviously a very big question. I'm only addressing I'm only giving you here part of the answer by measuring the antibody level in each of these participants in December, also at the start of the dry season. What are the antibody levels against 17 falciparum antigens? Most of them being expressed at the surface of the mesozoites, many of them being previous vaccine candidates. The general results, as expected, is that older individuals tend to have higher antibody level because of more exposure throughout life. And here are the detailed results. So for each of the 17 antigens, I'm showing in red the antibody level for the slow clearers, so long-lasting infection, and in gray, antibody level in fast clearers, so short-lasting infection. And overall, apart for a few antigens, there is basically no difference in the antibody levels in the fast or slow clearers. However, in fact, in the younger people below 15 years old, lower antibody level was actually associated with faster parasite clearance. So you might have expected the other way around. The more antibodies you've got against falciparum, the quicker you can eliminate the infection. But that's not what we see. Is it a total surprise? No, because previous cohorts, also done in Africa, showed similar results. They show that the higher antibody titer is associated with a greater risk of symptomatic malaria. And what it means is that, especially in the Gambia, where transmission is so heterogeneous, some people will get bitten by infectious mosquitoes a lot, some only a few times. And so what you see with higher level of antibodies is simply that it's probably that these people have been infected more often with falciparum. But these antibodies clearly do not explain short or long-lasting infection. So far, we've not found good markers for the duration of an infection. But actually, the most simple thing you can do is to measure the parasitemia at the start of the dry season, so in December. So parasitemia being the amount of parasites in someone's blood. And indeed, the higher the parasitemia, the longer the infection will last over the 6-month periods. And in fact, that parasitemia is relatively stable. It's only decreasing slightly over time during the dry season. And in case you're interested about gametocytes, yes, indeed, gametocytes were present, but only at very low parasitemia. And we did not observe any change in male to female gametocyte ratio over time. Sorry. Next thing you can assess is the clonality of the infection. A little bit of background. An infection can be monoclonal if you detect a single strain of falciparum in an individual, or it can be polyclonal if you detect multiple strains or multiple genotypes. We measured this clonality by MSP2 genotyping, and indeed, a higher number of clones was associated with longer lasting infection, slow clearers. And this high number of clones was again relatively stable over time. So here are the 22 long-lasting infections, slow clearers, ranked by higher MOI, so multiplicity of infection at the top, and was still relatively high 6 months later. So to recap, the best variable that we have found associated with longer infection is the polyclonality of the infection, over 10-fold more likely to be slow clearers if you have polyclonal infection at the start of the dry season. But also, if the parasitemia is detectable by microscopy, there is a very, very high chance that this infection will still be ongoing at the end of the dry season. And that's obviously important from a public health aspect, because these are the sort of infection that we want to target in priority, because presumably these people are the reservoir for Plasmodium falciparum during the dry season when there is no transmission. So I hope I have convinced you that falciparum asymptomatic chronic infections are very common and can last for a long time. So how on earth is a parasite able to evade the immune system for so long? Well, to answer the question, I have to introduce you to the wonderful world of VAR genes, also known as PFAMP1. So PFAMP1 is the name of the protein, VAR is the name of the gene. It's actually the same thing. You will find 50 to 60 of them per genome, mainly located in the subtelomeres. And the most important thing about them is that they're extremely polymorphic. Every single VAR gene sequence is basically unique. That's why I'm showing them with different colors. And on top of that, every strain or every genotype in the wild will have pretty much its own repertoire of 50 VAR genes. How many strains are there in the wild? Billions and billions. So the total number of vagins in the world is virtually infinite, which is obviously